If you treat your employees badly, it's just never going to go well. It's going to come across, and I think that's both critical in the hospitality industry and a restaurant bar, but also in veterinary medicine. I mean, the animals are so good at sensing emotions, right? If you have people that are unhappy being there, you'll see a clear difference with how dogs and cats react to them. But yes, the connection between the employee experience and the client experience is so profound.
Welcome to the Intangible Brand, where we explore the connection between employee experience and client experience and the hidden forces that make brands stick. I'm George Ghneim, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Carl Winstead. And today we're joined by George Ghneim. He's a veterinarian, a restaurateur, a distiller, and he's built thriving businesses in three completely different worlds. From caring for animals to crafting cocktails, George has created brands that people love to work for and love to support. So we're excited to dig into what ties it all together, maybe a deep understanding of how brand, client experience, and culture connect. So George, thanks for being here on the show.
Thank you both very much, and really nice to meet you as well, Jerry.
Yeah. George, you and I actually go back a little bit, and it's really awesome. I've been excited about having the chance to talk to you on this podcast. You and I sort of share this interesting place where we have been. You're my veterinarian.
Right?
You're a client, and also somebody I call a friend. So, and it's always been interesting to sort of understand and kind of see where you're going in your careers, and I say plural. So kind of getting into that, you have no doubt built successful ventures, and they span from veterinary medicine, restaurants, and now distilling, which that's an interesting one too. But those are three industries that typically really don't overlap. So I wonder just to start, can you just walk us through your journey and what led you to build such a really incredibly diverse an interesting career.
Well, thank you for all those wonderful compliments. I think it's really it kind of goes back to so we were first of all we're immigrants. We immigrated from Bethlehem, from the West Bank of Palestine when I was a child, and we were instant workaholics. I've worked with my parents my whole life. Since I was 8 years old, I worked every weekend. We had a little corner grocery liquor store in San Francisco, and so my whole childhood, I worked weekends and summers, and really never got involved in a lot of social aspects of life. And by the time I wanted to be a veterinarian at a very young age, since I really knew what it was. But when I went off to college, I also worked weekends. And so when everybody else would go off on trips skiing or to the beach or spring break, I always worked. My only outlet was really embracing something that was a very big part of my culture already, which was food and drink. I would work my butt off all weekend. I would reward myself by going and having a nice dinner or buying a nice bottle of wine. So that's really where my passion for the hospitality industry kind of grew. Now, keeping in mind in my culture, hospitality was crucial, and we cooked these complex meals on a nightly basis. For when people would talk about Thanksgiving younger, I would always kind of scratch my head and say, "But we do that like every weekend at least." So I went off to vets or, I went to vet school, and then really I developed a passion for wildlife disease and infectious disease. So I went on to do a master's and then a PhD, and that whole time I worked weekends, and again just continued my love affair with food and drink. Eventually, I moved to Raleigh in 2003 for a job at the state health department, and at that point, I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but I'd achieved all my major career goals. I went to vet school, I got the master's, I got the PhD, I got the job, and I looked at Raleigh, and it was just an up and coming downtown. And I'd always loved restaurants, something that I really thought about doing for a long time. And then I met my wife, and we decided to do it together. And in 2006, we opened up a restaurant in downtown Raleigh. It was very cutting edge for Raleigh at that time. The French Italian restaurant, and really unique. And we loved it. We loved every part of it. It was like hosting a party every night. But that's where I think I really understood the importance of that guest experience from the moment they walk in the door, making sure that the whole process went smoothly, that they really enjoyed themselves to the moment that they left. So I was working in public health during that time and really quite frustrated with my role. And the reason I was a veterinarian. And if you're in a human health department and you're not an MD, you really were not looked at the same, at least in this
Mm,
health department. And so I ended up just kind of having tasks that I thought they were not very interesting. Let's just put it that way to be nice. And I was getting more and more frustrated and more just kind of depressed over time. I still worked weekends as a clinician doing emergency. And one day I was sitting there and I said to myself, if I could run a restaurant, I could run a vet hospital. What am I doing right now? So that really is that moment that I said, okay, it's time for me to go into a clinical practice to look at a management and ownership role in a hospital. And that's when I went to Care First Carl, where we ended up meeting at some point.
right.
But to answer a very short question, a very long, it really was owning the restaurant that made embrace that concept of a guest experience. And I took that into veterinary medicine and I really apply it the same way. Either way, this is a customer or a client, whatever you want to call it, and making sure that their entire experience is comfortable, is pleasant, is enjoyable, really became the core of how I practiced veterinary medicine.
So, George, when you kind of think about all of these different things, and I think you may have sort of already touched on this a little bit, but there's some kind of connection for you with all these different ventures. So how do you, I guess, how do you think about the brand and the experience you have kind of across all those different things that we just talked about?
That's kind of embodies everything I feel like I do in these different industries is really have a focus on taking care of those people. And I think the root of it for me is wanting to take care of the animals, right? I have this love for animals as far back as I can remember. I want to help them. And
Yeah.
if I do a good job of taking care of the people, of communicating my goal of helping those animals, it's just gonna go better all around.
Yeah.
So let's say I really wanna take care of the dog, but I treat their their human horribly. Well, they're not gonna listen to any of my recommendations. They're not gonna follow them, and then I'm gonna do a poor job of actually taking care of that dog. So I think the root of it is really caring for others, and this is something I've tried to also do with my staff. If I take good care of my staff, then that's
Right.
gonna come across to those clients. That's gonna come across to the animals. They can sense that really
Yeah.
well. And I think they then represent what I wanna do. And again, humbling for me, one of the reasons I've been so successful is I have a group of veterinarians and veterinary technicians that have followed me for years and years. And I can't but what they do is they embody my vision for hospitality, and that's
Yeah.
really been the secret of my success.
S What you just said when you talked about vision, for the business makes me think of a word that we use a lot, which is brand, and I'm wondering what does brand mean to you in in the context of the businesses that you have?
So I do think about brand a lot. You know, I came up with the name and the logo for my vet hospitals that I'm in partnership with Vets Pets, but I came up with the name Oak Harbor Hospital. And what I want is when somebody sees that brand to know that we're always going to take care of them as best as we can. We're always going to take care of their animals as best as we can. I have a really funny story about this. I was at a Halloween party a year ago, just across the street, a couple houses down, and I met a gentleman there who turned out to be one of my clients, and he said something that I've never forgotten. And he said, "You know what's really cool about the Oak Harbor Hospitals?" And he said, "It doesn't matter which one you go to, they're all amazing."
Mm.
And that really it made my day, and I think about it all the time. That's what I want that brand to represent, that if you walk into one of my hospitals, if you interact with one of my doctors or one of my staff, is you know that they're really gonna do a great job, and you should be happy going into any one of them.
George, are you sure he wasn't referring to the great architecture and design? No.
The architecture is also lovely.
Well, it is one thing, kind of all kidding aside, it is one thing that you have talked about on every project that we've done. You've expressed no matter what the size of the practice, whether it's, it's a smaller, 4 exam room thing, or we've done some, a couple of very large, 24-hour centers. You do always talk about how it feels, and how it feels. You talk about a lot of times, especially in an emergency situation, people are coming in and they're already stressed. And they're already concerned about their animal. They're concerned about what all's happening. And part of what you really do a really good job of is creating an environment that is sort of calming, and even for your staff too, that it really is a place that there's a lot going on, but you take, I think, a lot of care in how that place feels. And that to me is another kind of piece of your brand that again, no matter where it is.
It's being welcoming, right? You
Mhm.
can be welcoming with the physical space, you can be welcoming with the emotions, you can be welcoming with how you talk to them, but the overall feeling is I want people to walk in and feel like we want them there and we want to help them. So I
Yeah.
think that is critical, and when you go along to the restaurant bar, it's the same thing, right? You wanna walk into a place that's comfortable, you don't wanna walk in and go, "Ooh, I don't know, this doesn't feel very good, it's
Right. Yeah.
cold or it's too loud," or there's a lot of different factors that come into play, but at the end of the day, if you wanna talk about that entire experience, it starts when they first walk in.
Right. Right.
So, with all these different businesses and the experiences that you're trying to create, you're leading a lot of different teams. And I would imagine maybe the personalities of those teams is a little bit different. Someone who's a doctor in a vet clinic versus being a server or a line cook in a restaurant. So, there's a lot of different personalities, pressures, and things that they're under. What has that taught you about creating a healthy and motivated culture?
That's a really good question. That's probably the most challenging part of any business really, right? It's full
Mhm.
is hard. And maybe I'm just getting old, but I feel like it's become a little bit more challenging in the last, 5 to 10 years.
Mm.
I think the most important thing I've learned about that is I personally need to do a better job of listening, of not reacting to situations, right? Because you'll get so many situations where your initial reaction is being upset or being angry or stressed, and I've I've worked really hard, and I still have a long way to go in just stopping for a moment, taking a breath, and thinking it through before you respond. Now, there are some situations where I choose to not be patient and show my emotions when I feel like somebody's giving bad service. I'm gonna
Mm.
be very direct and straightforward about
Mhm.
that. But I think one thing that I would say, Jerry, is most of the population working for me, whether it be the vet hospitals or the restaurant, actually have a lot in common. It's a lot of younger people,
Mhm.
Mhm.
a lot of people that really weren't sure what they wanted to do in life, and they're like, I really love animals, or I could be a server, I could be a bartender. So there's actually a good amount of overlap. Yes, it's a little
Interesting.
different when you start to get to the doctors, but overall, I would say what I found is if you treat people well, they really wanna be recognized, they wanna be
Mhm.
respected, and I think that really kinda carries across all these different industries.
Yeah,
Mm.
interesting. So you talked about you mentioned the employee experience, and that's something we talk about here on the podcast. And we find sometimes that there are things that people misunderstand about employee experience. And I can imagine, especially in a small, your service driven business, that there can be misunderstandings about the employee experience. Do you think if there are things that you think you found people misunderstanding about that?
Um, I mean, I guess I'm not sure I understand the question, like, as far as misunderstandings between each other, you mean, or
Well, or just maybe just misunderstanding, like, how employee experience works and how it's important, and I can imagine, again, you're in a fast-paced
Yes, yes.
environment. How how do you sort of keep that in place?
Yes, there are a lot yes, in that regard, there are lots of misunderstandings. I think that's probably the biggest challenge with doctors is they lose sight of how critical the support staff are to them doing
Mm,
the job.
mhm,
And I think I see that a lot where they're very demanding or condescending, and I just really try to point out to them that we can't do our job without all these wonderful people that support us, whether it's answering the phone or doing the diagnostics or holding, the patients for us. I think one of the reasons I've been successful is when I'm working like, I worked on the floor yesterday, I just jump in and do everything. I don't sit there and say, "Well, you do all this, and I'm just gonna go sit and eat my lunch." I'll help put in the
mhm,
IV catheters, I'll help restrain the patients. So I think the biggest way to understand the employees is to just be right there with them, and
mhm,
they really appreciate that. When there's some when let's say there's a challenging client or a challenging situation, rather than make them go handle it, I jump in and take it on myself, and
mhm.
that wins so much credit with the staff, and I can really see how much they appreciate the fact that I'll talk the talk and walk the walk.
Yeah, it's good.
That's been one of the biggest challenges for me in the last few years is I'm not seeing patients as often. I am more in a desk or at a desk. I'm on a computer,
Mhm,
and so I've lost touch a little bit, and I think that's very hard for me. So sometimes I do just like to jump in and work a shift, and it reminds me of why I love my job so much, and I think it reminds the staff of what I do as well.
okay, cool.
As you're talking about these businesses and your team and your clients and customers, the care that you have about them is very evident. And I'm wondering, I think sometimes people confuse service and care. Um, so as you've been thinking about your businesses, how do you design an experience or create an experience that makes your customers and your clients feel that they're cared for, not just being served?
That's a hard one. I think the biggest part is you put yourself in their shoes and say, "Okay, if I was to go have an experience like this, what would I look for?" And I think the other side to that is just letting those feelings come across.
Mhm,
And I think that it is a little bit of a tightrope situation where you wanna be professional, but you also you should show those emotions. And I think one of the things that's carried me throughout much of my career is just appreciation for what I have, and that being again, I've loved animals as far back as I can remember, and when I was in the West Bank, there wasn't available veterinary medicine. You really didn't have the same kind of quality of life of pets that you have here, and I think once I moved to this country and really understood what it was to be a veterinarian, and once I achieved those dreams, I just have such an appreciation for the fact that I get to be around these wonderful animals and the I like to show that. One of the things that I did in my hospitals is when we used to do a Christmas bonus when I first started at Care First,
mhm.
but I changed it to a Thanksgiving bonus because I want to really show the staff how thankful I was for my position, how thankful I was to have that job, and how thankful I was for them. And I used to give this speech every year the week before Thanksgiving, and everybody started calling it the Thanksgiving speech, give out the bonuses. And if people weren't at work that day, they missed it, but they still got their bonuses, but they would come find me, like, a couple days later, and they say, "Hey, can I have the Thanksgiving speech again?" And it was like,
Oh,
"Really?" And
yeah.
so I think I love what I do. I absolutely love it. And
So
that's what gives me my energy and my passion for this career, and I think people see that.
yeah. Well, with what you're talking about, you're talking really on kind of on the employee side and that experience. but all three of us are in professions where we can't just have the employee experience in a vacuum because we're all of us are interacting with clients, and so we have to navigate the client experience. I'm just wondering in the different things that you've done, have you noticed sort of like connections or maybe even tensions sometimes between the employee experience piece and the client experience piece in your work?
Yeah, I think there's a very strong connection there.
Mhm,
You know, I got touched on it briefly a little bit. Maybe I hope I'm answering your question, Carl, but I think you have to show that same level of caring for your employees if you want them to really represent that to the clients or the customers. I mean, if you treat your employees badly, um, it's it's just never going to go well. It's going to come across,
yeah,
and they're not going to do a good job. And I think that's both critical in the hospitality industry and a restaurant bar, but also in veterinary medicine. I mean, the animals are so good at sensing emotions, right? If you have people that are unhappy being there, you'll see a clear difference with how dogs and cats react to them. So, if I see an employee that's having a bad day, that's obviously anxious, I know that's gonna make everything more challenging. So,
mhm,
I really try to take them aside and just kinda hear what's going on, and I think, again, listening is so important there. But, yes, the connection between the employee experience and the client experience is so profound.
yeah. We kind of say in our world, and it's really kind of yours too, is that you really have two resources that you get to work with, and one is your employees, and one is your clients.
Yeah.
And if either one of those are out of sync, you really don't have a business. The dogs and the cats aren't coming to you without a client.
It's that's
And
I try to
and
get that across all the time.
and when the client brings the animal in, if there's no employee there, like you said, then there's no service going on. So, yeah, I think especially in a service industry like what you're in, that there's a very, like you say, is a very strong, connection, certainly.
I definitely see that challenge with some of the younger veterinarians that I hire. They really they've been in school, right, the whole time. They
Mm,
haven't really dealt with clients at that level, and they don't wanna communicate. This has been a huge issue since COVID. When COVID occurred and everybody went to curbside, so the clients would come and they would park, and you would talk on the phone, right?
mm,
Well,
mhm,
I hated that. I Anytime I had an emergency, I would go outside to the car and from a couple of feet away, I would talk to them. But I've seen such a big change in how we do, especially emergency medicine since COVID, where the veterinarians, they don't want to go talk to the clients. And I try to explain to them, if you spend those 5 minutes talking to that client, it will save you hours of work.
mm,
And I'll tell you, a big thing that's happening right now in veterinary medicine are complaints to the veterinary board, right? Well, in all my years of practicing, I've never had a direct complaint. I've had 2 complaints, so against multiple doctors, and I was included in it because, we have these 24-hour hospitals, and you have multiple doctors working on the case. But I truly think it's not because I'm an amazing veterinarian, it's because I talk to people. I look them in the eye, I'm honest with them, I'm direct. And if they have an issue, they're gonna tell me about it, and I can do something about it rather than just going and complaining to the board. And so I think just communication with the clients is beyond critical. I mean, we can't do like you said, we can't do our job if we don't treat the people well. Right.
yeah, yeah,
S So I think one of the things that's interesting about videos and podcasts is it gives us a lens into somebody else's world, and that's why we talk to folks like you. And you're in an interesting position of having 3 different businesses, and I'm wondering, have you learned lessons from one business that you've been able to take into the others that, maybe you wouldn't have if you weren't both a restaurateur and a veterinarian?
Definitely. I think the with small businesses, there's so many similarities, right? And it's like we've talked about so much of the customer client experience, of managing people. And I think when it comes to the financial aspect, what's important for the finances of this business. I do think that they have conveyed really well across the different businesses I've been involved in. Obviously, they're both service oriented. Now, in the restaurant bar, you have the products, that's important, but really in veterinary medicine, you have the medications,
Hmm.
and so those are really kind of comparable. So I mean, we've touched on this over and over throughout this conversation. You can't get away from the people aspect of the business.
Mhm.
We've talked about the physical aspect, having a pleasant, comfortable environment. But while there obviously are differences, I think at the end of the day, if you're managing a small business, it comes down to really similar principles across the board. Absolutely. We haven't talked about the distillery as much. That one's a little different. And in full disclosure, I can't really say I'm a distiller. I built a distillery, but I have somebody that's supposed to be doing the primary distilling. And unfortunately, we are not distilling yet because we are waiting for a federal permit.
Mm.
And supposedly, our lawyer told us we were next in line to get this federal distilling permit before the federal government shut down. So now we're just waiting for our distilling permit to get going.
Well, we're all waiting for that, George.
I hope so. I hope
We're
so.
we're getting very thirsty.
That's
Well,
right.
and that's gonna be an interesting business because I imagine that you'll sell the product through the restaurant, but I imagine you're also gonna sell it in other venues, so it's a more product-oriented business versus being a
Exactly.
more service-oriented business, but there's still lessons that cross over between the 2 of those. I imagine that
I mean,
you still have to
yeah,
think
for sure.
about the people, and maybe you're a step removed from the customer, but if you're going through a distribution network, if you've got retailers, you still have people that you're interacting with.
Absolutely. You can't ever get away from that for sure. But like you said, it's a lot fewer people. The equipment on that side is something I've never realized how complicated it would be to build a
Mhm,
distillery. There are a lot of lessons I learned. One of which maybe be a little bit or do a little bit more homework before you decide to build something like that. It is it's been an amazing project and it's beautiful. But you're right, a lot more product driven. We'll be able to sell our product, we're able to use it in our drinks in the bar.
mhm.
We'll also be able to sell bottles there, including on Sundays, which is a kind of a cool little loophole, right? You'll be able to
That's
buy,
interesting.
yeah, that's the only place you can go buy bottles of liquor on Sunday is in a craft distillery like that. But then the rest of it will go through the North, at least anything in this state will go through the North Carolina ABC.
Mhm.
We haven't really delved into distribution in other states just yet. I think that's probably a couple of years away.
I saw Carl make a mental note about the Sunday purchase.
I really did. I did.
Well, I mean, let's say something is coming up and all of a sudden you have a party happening that Sunday and you didn't make it to ABC, you're kind of SOL, right? But
Right.
here, you could just run down and pick up a couple bottles. It's great.
Okay, that's not good to know. Um, George, tell me a little bit. You've named your restaurant Boatman. I'm just curious if you maybe share a little about where that imagery, what that name represents to you, how that sort of ties into your approach to these businesses.
So there were so I've got 3 other partners, that are, working there and building equity through equity, and we had a branding guy, and we were sitting there kind of brainstorming, and what we talked about, a lot of things we touched on is transporting the customer to a different place, making it a unique and wonderful experience, and I honestly don't remember who came up with the idea of, well, the boatman on the River Styx transports you to another world.
Mm,
And we came up with this whole boatman spirits as an overall experience, right? A total customer experience, but also a play on words with spirits being the spirits that we're going to produce there as well. So, initially when I started talking to this one guy, he was actually a bartender next door to one of my hospitals, Dixie Trail. That was that restaurant right next to it. And we were becoming friends over time. And one day he's like, "Here, try this." And I loved it. It was a single malt whiskey, and he's like, "Well, I made that." And he was at NC State getting a degree in bioprocessing sciences, and he wanted to become a distiller. And distilling is something I've always been fascinated and interested in because I just think it's so amazing that you could take grains, ferment them, and then over time create this liquid that's just so complex and can be so variable. And so we started talking. This was about 6 years ago. Him and I started talking and really started talking more about doing a distillery maybe 4 years ago or so. But when you talk about people and managing people, I quickly realized that he was not the one to run the business.
Mm,
So we
Mm.
kind of kicked it around for a couple of years and eventually said, okay, we need somebody else to run this business where he could do the distilling, but he was not a manager. And then I had a friendly acquaintance who also wanted to do a distillery and had a business plan already built. And the three of us started talking about it and really hit it off. And that's kind of what started it. And then there was another guy who wanted to open a bar, and he wanted to join us, and then we said, "Okay, we'll just do a distillery bar." So that's
Yeah.
kinda how it all started, and as many of my projects, Carl, it just kept growing and became this kind of monster.
Yeah. But a good monster, right?
A good monster, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, the project is 7,000 square feet now and just really absolutely beautiful. We're very
Yeah.
excited about it.
Yeah. It's a great place. Yeah.
there's something really interesting that you just said, and I don't know if you um, sort of understood, but you talked about the different people who are involved in this business and recognizing the strengths that each one has, right? Someone's bringing the ability to do the distilling, someone's bringing the ability to run the business, someone's bringing the ability to run a restaurant, a bar. Um, can you talk a little bit about in creating the right experience for employees, but also for customers, how you help people get to the right place so that it's good for them, but it's good for the business as well?
That's a great question. I think that's something that is a very challenging aspect of being a manager or business owner, but at the same time, it can be the most satisfying, the most gratifying experience is to find the right fit for somebody and see them kind of blossom and grow. I think with the distillery, restaurant, bar, that's still very much a work in progress. But it's just so everybody knows, we just opened in June,
Mm,
and so it's really a very new project.
Mhm.
I think that managing people and finding the right fit for them is just so challenging. And there's definitely times I've made mistakes with it. I had a situation where I had an employee that worked for me for years, and I promoted him into a management role, and it went well for a little while, and then it really just crashed and burned, and he got so anxious and ended up really leaving veterinary medicine, and that's one I always think about with regret because I feel like I had some, um I pushed too much responsibility on him, and I have some
Mm.
fault there. But on the other hand, I have so many that have been with me for years and years, and they started out as technicians, and now there's 2 young ladies, they manage all 5 of my hospitals, and
mm,
just to see how they've grown and how well they're doing financially and how well they're doing as managers is something I'll always cherish, honestly.
Mhm.
But there's times that I've made mistakes with that, and I know you're gonna make mistakes, right? That's just
right.
a part of
Yeah.
life, part of owning a business. But I mean, for me, it's one where I will try really hard to learn from all those mistakes and try not to repeat them, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. Education is always sometimes an easy thing that it can also be a hard knock
It can be
sometimes.
rough
Right.
for sure, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. George, when you think about all the different things that you're involved in, all the things that are going on, and you look around at other people who are doing, a business, either one or multiple things. Um, is there something you that you would offer somebody some advice? Like, this is what I think business owners get wrong the most. This is where they make the misstep in the connecting the brand, the client experience, employee experience. Like, this is when I step outside of my own world, this is something I see happening in other places.
Yeah.
And I wish business owners knew this because they could probably fix it.
That's that's a very hard question because I think so many people have to do a job that they don't necessarily love.
Mm,
Yeah, I look back to my parents and my father especially, he worked 7 days a week for decades running a grocery store, like I said, and, I mean, he enjoyed it, but he didn't love it. But for me,
Yeah.
it's embrace that passion, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess I've been lucky in the sense that I followed my dreams, and I was so passionate about being a veterinarian, and then so passionate about public health, and so passionate about food and drink. And if you really embrace that and don't lose sight of why you're doing it, then I think everything else for me just kind of worked out. I think people the biggest I see, and sometimes it's challenging for me as well, is to worry too much about me, about how well the business is doing financially, and it's important, obviously, you gotta do well financially, but I have to remind myself, if I do everything else right, if I'm a good veterinarian, if I communicate with the client, if I take care of my staff, then the business is gonna do well,
mhm.
and I'm trying to take that same approach with the restaurant bar. But you have to be passionate about what you're doing for that to be the case. And again, I think I'm very lucky in that regard.
Yeah.
But what
Well,
I would say is it's even if you don't love it, you've gotta make sure that you're following those business principles and everything else will follow that.
Mhm.
well, I can say from experience, both, on the client side and, kind of seeing you with employee side, that is one thing that I think is such a strength of yours that you do have such a passion. You have a passion about life, and it bleeds into everything that you do. Well, it is. That's,
Well, thank you.
your life is this big thing between, growing a growing, brand of animal care facilities and restaurant and distilling. And I think you're one of those people that, it's very easy to sort of sense that passion. And I think that's where I think a lot of times we have to remember our role as business owners too, or leaders in firms, that we are the leaders. And that if we don't feel passionate and we can't show it and we can't bring other people along on that journey, it's not going to be as successful. But I can say that knowing you all these years, you definitely embody that passion piece, and it's always great to see.
Well, thank you, Carl. That's wonderful to hear.
Yeah, Carl, I think it's interesting because sometimes the work itself and George talking about your dad and the corner store, sometimes the work itself is not the thing that you necessarily find your passion in. Sometimes it's things that are adjacent to that. Maybe it is the employees, maybe it is the customers. It's not necessarily the thing that you're doing. And that actually may be even more important than, say, being an architect who's passionate about architecture. That's great, and I think that comes through in different ways. But when you're also passionate about people and the relationships that you're building, I mean, as I think about this conversation, and we kind of bring this in for a landing, one of the key takeaways for me is just this idea of, you know, the relationships that we're building with our team, with our customers being genuine, letting your feelings come through, letting the passion come through, makes such a big difference in creating that brand that you're trying to create.
Absolutely. I think it's completely critical to be successful in a service-oriented business to have those relationships and have those emotions come across. If when I have veterinarians, like I've had some doctors working for me who are amazing clinicians and they really do care, but they don't show it.
Mhm.
And you can see that has an impact on the relationship
Yeah.
with staff and clients.
Yeah. Well, and you're in a business where, particularly in the veterinarian medicine, where not every single encounter that you have ends the way that you hope that it's going to. It's just the nature of medicine, right? So,
Ooh, yeah.
can you talk a little bit about managing the emotion in a positive way? Um, because you do care so much about both the animal and the client. Uh, and I think sometimes doctors try to wall off that part of themselves because they experience it so many times or because they feel like they're supposed to be the rock in the situation or what have you?
Yeah, that's a really hard part of the job. The thing that keeps me going with that is knowing that if we're there to help in that journey, it could be worse.
Mhm,
Like take euthanasias, for example. I there's some emergency shifts I worked where I've had to euthanize multiple animals, and it's emotionally very taxing.
mhm.
But for those people, they're losing their loved pet, their best friend. Yeah, I just did one yesterday where this was a young man, and he had a picture of his infant or I guess toddler with the dog, and he was holding it up, showing it to the dog as we euthanized it, and I mean that's heartbreaking.
Oh, wow.
Um, no,
Yeah.
it was brutal,
Yeah,
and I haven't worked in an emergency shift. Well, I mean a few months, but it's a reminder to me of how important it is. And I've talked about my father a few times. He passed away a handful of months ago, and throughout the process of him passing, it really struck me of how much better it would be if we didn't let him suffer, because he did have to
mm,
suffer a little while, thankfully not too long. But I think as tough as that situation is in veterinary medicine, I do often get reminded of how important it is and how much worse it could be if we weren't there. Now, there's other times, obviously you lose patients through accidental non-euthanasia means, and like you said, it's part of medicine, and there are definitely things that go wrong and clients that get really upset with us. And I think that the important emotion there to show is humility and really showing that you're sorry, right? But things do just go wrong sometimes.
right,
It's unfortunately it happens. Whether error, sometimes it is human error. We make mistakes. I've definitely made mistakes, but it's being honest about it,
mhm.
and just being really sorry. Yeah,
Oh,
Yep.
there's such a core truth that's there that's relevant even beyond, and well beyond medicine. We're
Mhm.
as professionals in whatever business that we're in, we are shepherding a client through an experience that they don't experience as often as we do. Even if it's a restaurant, we eat out of restaurants every day, but the servers in your restaurant are shepherding the customer through an experience that's unique to your restaurant, to the place that you've created and built. And so that empathy, that caring, that transparency, that authenticity, all of that is huge in creating the experience that you want for someone who doesn't experience it every day. It's easy to get jaded, I would think, because you
very.
do see it and experience it every day.
Yeah, and I think again, trying to remember, maybe we eat out all the time, but this may be the one chance they've had to eat a nice meal in 6 months or a year.
Yeah.
You just don't know, right? I think one of the most important things I've tried to really get better at over time is not judging
Mm,
and not assuming anything and just really making it the best experience possible. This is a big challenge in emergency medicine is not judging because you'll have these animals come in and sometimes they look really bad and you'll see the staff go, wow, why haven't they done something about it before? And we don't know their situation. And
right,
what I tell the staff is they're here now. And
right.
it doesn't really matter what led to this point, but they're here in this moment in time, and it's our job to do absolutely the best that we can for them.
Yeah. No, that's such a good point.
Yeah.
Well, George, we really appreciate you taking the time and spending it with us, sharing your insights, talking about your businesses and this intersection between the client experience and the culture that you're creating and how that is building the brand. But I think as we wrap up, I'm going to ask Carl to ask his favorite question.
Alright, let's hear it.
Well, first, I wanted to say thank you to George for taking the time and kind of sharing with us. It's been a great conversation. So one of the things that we do ask all of our guests is that we know that most of us are exploring. There's either a book or there's a podcast. There's something that you're either into or have been into. So we always just like to say, is there something that you'd recommend to our audience, whether it is a book or a podcast that you might think that these folks would they only hear this?
That's a great question. I think that, one of the because of all the emotions that I deal with my profession
Mm.
and all the stuff we've talked about, I've tried to work really hard on not worrying so much about what's happened before and not judging. And
Mhm.
I recently, so I do, Carl, I think you know this. I do a Japanese martial art called kendo,
Yeah.
and I've very poor job of delving into Zen Buddhism, but Zen Buddhism is an area that I've started to look at. And I read a book that really changed my outlook, and it's called Peace is Every Step by, he was a really internationally known Zen Buddhist monk. He passed away a few years ago. Thich Nhat Hanh was his name. He was amazing. And then I had a friend, I was talking to a friend about this, and he turned me on to a book called The Daily Stoic. I don't know if
Okay.
you guys have ever looked at that, but really about Stoicism. And there's an excerpt each day that you read in the Daily Stoic. They both have a similar format. But one of the things that struck me is how much in common these two philosophies had, coming from different, thousands of miles apart, yet there was such
Mhm.
a significant overlap. But those are the 2 books that I've read and rereading actually, because they really help me kind of focus on the present moment, not being stuck on the past, not stressing about the future. And I think with all the different businesses I have, I really need that reminder because I can get pulled in a lot of different directions. I really need a reminder to focus on what's happening right now and really focus on what I can control. I Stoicism is really big about you cannot control your external environment, and really in some ways you can't even control your physical environment, right? If you have a
Right.
physical ailment, but what you can control is your mental process and how you react to situations. And I think that's really helped me manage all these different situations.
That's awesome.
I'm gonna
We'll
look that one up for sure.
we'll put them in the show notes.
I
I
think
I
I'll
have
be able to
bought
use
that
that
book
one.
for so many people over the last few years.
Yeah.
So, George, as we wrap up, is there, if someone wants to kind of follow along with you in the restaurant and the hospitals, is there a place that they can find you online or learn more about the work that you're doing?
Ooh, that's a question I'm embarrassed to answer. I'm really bad at doing things on social media or LinkedIn. Um, I think if you go to social media, you can see Boatman Spirits and Oak Hive Vet Hospitals. It's just not me really doing that much with it. But you could definitely see what's happening with those businesses for sure.
That's awesome. Well, we'll link those two in the show notes as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
George,
And thank you both so much for having me. This
Mhm.
is a real experience.
yeah.
Great.
Thank you for joining us. So that wraps up another episode of the Intangible Brand. If you found value in our conversation with George today, please take a moment to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Your support helps us continue to bring these kinds of discussions for all of us.
And if you happen to be watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, our channel, because it's another way it helps others discover this show and join our community.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode, so feel free to leave a review or share your feedback or questions with us. You can reach us at hello@theintangible.brand.com. Tell us what you liked or maybe what you'd like to hear next.
And you can always connect with us also on LinkedIn or visit our own website, theintangible.brand.com. There you'll find more resources and information about the show.
As always, thanks for joining us on The Intangible Brand. Remember, the strongest brands are built on the experiences they create, both for their clients and their teams.